Now, the next speaker is absolutely incredible. I don't think you are not going to be captivated at all. Storytelling may seem like an old-fashioned tool today, and guess what? It probably is. But he believes that we can learn incredible and powerful lessons from remarkable stories. He also believes that stories fire up the imagination and stir up the soul. And they do. So I hand you over right now to Rob CASKIE.
Good morning, one and all. So nice to join you, and it's a real honor to be on screen amongst these fantastic speakers. And I think it's such a shame that Steve Barnett, a quite extraordinary human being, specializes in a non-speaking role, because I thought his storytelling in that last segment was just sublime. And what is very interesting for me is that I was lucky enough at university to do a fair amount of traveling on motorbikes to various parts of Africa. And whenever I came back, there was always a group of people who wanted to hear what had happened on the bike. And unbeknown to me, I was developing in their mind the reputation of being a reasonable storyteller. And back to that in a little while, because whilst at university, I was developing in my mind the idea of places I really wanted to travel in a great around the world journey. And there were three major priorities for me on that trip. One was to travel from Cape Town to Cairo, right across Africa. The second was to walk in the high Himalayas in Nepal and Tibet. And the third was to drive the Alaskan-Canadian highway. Now, it wasn't my intention at all to even mention this on screen, but Steve's magnificent story prompted me to do so, because I bought a little van in California and did it up as a camper van and drove it down to the southern end of the Baja Peninsula in Mexico, then all the way up through the western United States and up through Canada to Dawson Creek in British Columbia, mile zero of the 1,523 Alaskan-Canadian highway, and then drove those 1,523 miles, 2,500 kilometers, all the way to Fairbanks, Alaska, and back. And that wonderful story of Steve and the clarinet and meeting up with Kathy prompted me to share this with you. Because as the story unfolds, it turns out that David Rattray, then the doyen of storytelling in South Africa, particularly on the Anglo-Zulu War battlefields, was looking for someone to help him telling stories on the battlefields. And the curator of the museum happened to have been at university with me and recommended me to David. I studied agriculture. He recommended me for no other reason than the fact that he thought I told a reasonable story and perhaps could learn the history were I interested. Well, that was in 2000. So here we are 20 years on. And as this great saga and as this great chapter in my life has unfolded, there have been many things that have become abundantly clear to me. And the prime one is that I'm particularly interested in the behavior of human beings when the chips are down. And perhaps the last 19 years has been a precursor and an entree to 2020, where the chips are down for so many people all over the globe. And the chips are down for so many folks in my profession: hospitality, tourism, entertainment, the arts. But I, as a young kid, always wanted to get down to Antarctica. Trips down there were out of the question in terms of the fee. So I began actively to study men like Robert Falcon Scott and Roald Amundsen and Henry Ernest Shackelton, with a view to getting down to Antarctica, telling stories about early Antarctic exploration on board of the cruise ships and the smaller expedition ships that go down there on very specialized expeditions. And what a journey it has been, because on the 14th of December of 2011, which, if you know anything about Antarctic history, is the centenary of Roald Amundsen attaining the South Pole. I was lucky enough to fly to Antarctica with a company from Cape Town called White Desert. And we flew down there in a Russian Ilyushin jet, landed on the ice and spent the most incredible 24 hours in that frozen winter wilderness of Antarctica. As the story unfolds. I've been lucky enough to go down many times over the last 9 years on various ships in various guises to various parts of Antarctica. But the main impetus and the main focus of my story here this morning is Ernest Shackelton, a remarkable man who was born in Ireland. His father was a Yorkshire doctor and a Quaker at that. His mother was Irish, and a man who grew up to be incredibly charismatic, confident, and lived his life like a rushing wind. He did his first trip to Antarctica with Robert Falcon Scott. It was a disaster between 1901 and 1904, and these two men never shared a major expedition together again. He did his own expedition to Antarctica on a ship called the Nimrod, where on the 9th of January 1909, in the most extraordinary circumstances, he got to 97 miles from the South Pole and realized then that they did not have enough food to get all the way to the pole and all the way back to their hut at Cape Royds. And Shackelton put the Union flag in the ice and extracted his party alive, saying later to his wife by letter that he figured she would prefer a live donkey to a dead lion. How many of us know when to say enough's enough and to draw the line? But Shackelton is best remembered for his journey and voyage on board of a ship called the Endurance. This ship ended up crushed by the ice in the Weddell Sea off the western side of the Antarctic continent, the highest, coldest, windiest, driest continent on earth, leaving 28 men and 57 dogs floating on the sea ice. And with that began one of the greatest adventure stories our race will ever know. Shackelton was to lead his team on the sea ice for more than a year, until the sea ice began to break up and they were forced into lifeboats to make a desperate landing on a place called Cape Valentine on an island, Elephant Island, at the top end of the Antarctic Peninsula. And Shackelton always said that as the options narrow, you have to go for broke. And leadership has many penalties, and one of the greatest is that of loneliness. And I've often thought in these times that we are facing, particularly those who are battling regarding the survival of their businesses and the survival of their families and the survival indeed of their enterprises, that you have to be courageous in terms of taking decisions to survive. How are you going to behave when the chips are down? Well, do you know that Shackelton would eventually sail with 5 men on board of a lifeboat that was only 6.5 meters long and 1.90 meters wide, 750 miles, 1,200 kilometers across the wildest ocean known to man, the Southern Ocean, to South Georgia, to try and get help from the Norwegian whalers. And as if the story has not held enough intrigue and drama already, having told these men on Elephant Island that were he not back in 3 months, they were to consider him dead and make the best plan they could for the men. 4 months and 1 week after leaving them, 4 months and 1 week after leaving them, on the 30th of August of 1916, Shackelton finally got back to Elephant Island to rescue his men. They hadn't lost a man. The men on Elephant Island had been reduced to eating seaweed and kelp just to survive. Considered one of the greatest survival stories human beings will ever know. Now, I have made a living over the last 20 years of sharing stories about the Anglo-Zulu War, South African history, the Anglo-Boer War, more latterly about early Antarctic exploration and indeed and that fabled northwest passage between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. And the lessons that can be drawn out of these stories and the behavior of human beings when the chips are down, when they really are facing the wall and facing the reality of failure, the reality of death and doom, unless the right decisions are taken, are quite remarkable. And I would love the opportunity of sharing these stories and others with you and your audiences. And I hope that this inquiry and invitation will be given your favorable consideration. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you.